we're making at the moment, but we'll be able to firm that up a little later. But it is still a remarkable reflection on where we are. Lord Forsyth is with us, Michael Forsyth, former Secretary of State for Scotland. Thanks for coming in, Michael. It's good to see you. You were making the point, to be fair, that when you were fighting elections for Westminster, 80% turnouts were not unusual.
Yeah, in Stirling we used to get 83%, but then it was a close-run fight, and every vote counted. And that's true in this referendum campaign. What we've seen latterly, certainly since I left politics, is the politicians concentrate on the marginal seats. The pollsters tell them to concentrate on specific dividing issues. And of course the voters think, well, what's the point? And so the turnout has fallen. In this campaign, everybody knows that their vote really matters. And the division between yes and no is pretty clear. So it's been very exciting. But there's a phrase from Burns, "O wad some power the gift to gie us, to see ourselves as others see us." And I think the political class, and I include my own party in this, really ought to take a lesson from this referendum campaign, because the one thing that came out on the doorsteps was the utter cynicism there is about politics and politicians, and the lack of trust. And that needs to be repaired. And actually this campaign, whichever way the result turns, I think is an opportunity for people to think very carefully about what that means to the organisation of our constitution in the future.
How does the political class rebuild or regain trust?
Well, I think, I mean, I was against devolution because I thought it would lead to this. But you can't have, whatever it's going to be, 46 or 47% of the people in Scotland not being satisfied with the present arrangement and not make radical changes which go well beyond the cobbled together vow that was...
But pause there, Michael, because I think we're going to Orkney.
Number of ballot papers counted in the Scottish independence referendum in the Orkney Islands area is 14,907. The turnout is 83.7%. The total number of votes cast in relation to each answer to the referendum question in this area is as follows. Yes, 4,883. No, 10,004. Rejected, 20. The reasons for rejection are as follows. Want of an official mark, 0. Voting in favour of both answers, 2. Writing or mark by which voter could be identified, 5. Unmarked or void for uncertainty, 13.
OK, so we have our second result in from Orkney, and it is a pretty hefty win for the No campaign there. 10,000 votes to the No campaign, and for Better Together, and 4,883 to the Yes campaign. A turnout of 83.7% in Orkney. That's our second result. Let's have a look at the figures then, just to put them on screen for you so that we can have a look at the figures. There we are, 4,883 to the yes, just over 10,000 to the no, turnout of just under 84%. And I think that really is, you were suggesting earlier, Sarah, that Orkney was never going to vote yes.
Orkney was never really in doubt. This is very, very solid Liberal Democrat territory. In fact, it's about the only part of Scotland, Orkney and the Shetland Islands, that are still solid Lib Dem territory. That's where the Secretary of State for Scotland, Alistair Carmichael, is the Westminster MP. They have 2 MSPs, the only 2 constituency MSPs left, MSPs in the Scottish Parliament left in Scotland. The Liberal Democrats, it's very interesting, we had an election in 2011 here after they had gone into coalition government in Westminster, and they did very, very badly indeed. They lost 12 seats, they lost all of their mainland constituencies. The only heartlands they have left are Orkney and Shetland, so it's not really a surprise that they voted no.
OK. Leslie, your thoughts on that?
Yes, I agree with that completely. I was up in Orkney actually quite recently, opening a shop in the main street, a Yes shop, which was kind of seen as a staggering achievement, that actually there would even be a shop in the main street there that would kind of give itself over to the Yes campaign. So, I mean, I'm sure that people will be disappointed they didn't get a better result, but it won't come as a huge surprise. OK, so that means that we've had 2 results in. Why don't we have a look then, just to have a look at our main Scotland tally with 2 results in, 30 to go, because we have a total of 32 before we can say that this night is over. And there you have it. It's so far it's a margin for the nose, but it's very early, and at this stage, Nick, I think it's fair to say
we are still looking to places like Glasgow and eventually Edinburgh to give us the kind of weight of votes that will allow us to make some kind of wise judgment.
Well, yes, because you're talking of an electorate
Yes.
in Orkney of, what, about 17,000, a little bit over. You're talking of electorates in Glasgow and Edinburgh of nigh on 500,000. I mean, these are hugely, hugely bigger areas, and therefore that will be very significant. But it's also because the pattern of voting is changing in Scotland. This thought that the west of Scotland was the key battleground, that those traditional Labour areas would be eaten into by the yes vote. Well, it does look like that's happened in Glasgow. The question tonight is whether it's enough. At the moment, the faces of no campaigners, the evidence we're seeing suggests it is not enough for them to go. But will you forgive me picking up on Michael Forsyth?
Yes,
just when he was interrupted by that result there, I heard the former Conservative Secretary of State for Scotland, the former opponent of devolution, say that what this referendum meant was many more powers for Scotland. Or I thought he was about to say that. And it's a sign of how much has changed, or didn't you?
It's all coming back to me. You're pretty well...
Did you not say that?
Look, the three-party leaders made a promise, which I think they'll find it very difficult to deliver, but has to be delivered in the light of this result. That means that there will have to be big changes, certainly English votes for English laws, and that means a huge change in the whole of the Constitution. So, I think we're going to win tonight. I mean, I think these two votes are, these two results are, two swallows don't make a summer, but I'm pretty certain that it will be a no result. That opens up a whole range of questions which is probably going to lead us towards more of a federation than people have been prepared to accept because of the England problem. And it's going to be driven by England, because people in England will want to see a fair distribution of resources, and they want to see English legislation. We're not talking about local government here, we're talking about legislation.
Forgive me, I was asking about Scotland, because I think you said that if it's, and we don't know yet, but let's say it's as many as 46% of people have voted yes.
Yes.
That then Scotland would require more powers, even than was agreed by those three-party leaders. Well, just a week or two ago.
Well, when you say it was agreed, as you know, it wasn't agreed. I mean, Gordon Brown issued a timetable, but it was like having a bus timetable where none of the destinations were filled in. We didn't know what the ultimate result would be, and I don't think that is actually going. If you take the most radical case, which is the Conservative case, I don't think that's going to satisfy people in Scotland. And equally, if you're going to go further, then you are going to have to make important changes to the way in which Westminster works, particularly those MPs representing English constituencies. And the idea that you can keep Barnet, which Gordon Brown described as being based on needs, that is wrong. What we need to do is to have a funding system which is based on need, in the same way as the distribution of resources by the Scottish Parliament is based on need. So there's a whole range of things that need to be sorted out here in order to make sure we don't end up in this position again.
So are you saying you don't think that the Westminster parties will be able to deliver this to the timetable that they agreed, that they all signed their solemn vow saying that this would be done in 9 months' time?
Well, when you say, Sarah, this will be done, they hadn't agreed on this.
Which won't make it easy to deliver it in 9 months' time. But they have the one thing they have agreed on is the timetable. They've signed up to doing this quickly, made sure it can't be kicked into the long grass. Are you saying they don't think they'll be able to do that?
Have they actually signed up to it?
Well,
I mean, there's a lot of doubt as to whether the three leaders actually have signed that. Gordon Brown has made a big push with it. Do you think the three leaders have signed it?
Leslie, whatever actually they cobbled something together because they got a bit of a fright by the polls. Let's be honest about that. But whatever they thought they were signing up to, the reality is, based on this campaign we've had here, there has to be important and radical change, which I think, and I'm an anti-devolutionist, I think will have to go beyond what was being suggested. Our leader in Scotland, Ruth Davidson, described the Scottish Parliament as a pocket money parliament. We're going to have to move. I mean, the argument that scared me to death on the doorsteps, used by the Yes campaign, was, look, we should be able to make our own decisions in Scotland. Now, it's gone too far now, just as we predicted it would if you set up a Scottish Parliament. But you then have to look at the other side of this, which is what happens in England and Wales and Northern Ireland. And you cannot say, well, we'll keep Barnet, when Wales, for example, is so badly shortchanged. At the same time, you have to have some kind of transitional arrangement. Now, how you can do all of this before the general election, which is effectively about 3 months of parliamentary time, you cannot tear up the British Constitution, put something in its place, and do it all because 3 party leaders decided to put out a press release. So somehow we have to persuade the people of Scotland that we're serious about giving them real powers, but it has to be in a proper manner that's fair to the other parts of the United Kingdom if we're to preserve the Union, which all of us on the side of the No campaign were determined to achieve.
Because what a lot of this campaign has been about is about mistrust of Westminster parliamentary leaders, and that's the real sense that we've got, is that the people of Scotland no longer trust Westminster to take care of their best interests. So if they all say, we promise you more powers and we promise them quickly, and then don't deliver it, that's going to be consequential for Westminster's reputation
Absolutely.
in Scotland.
I accept that, but I think that I suppose you could cobble together English votes on English matters, because that doesn't require legislation. But I don't actually think that giving the Scottish Parliament a slice of income tax revenue will enable it to operate effectively, and I don't think that people in England will accept the idea that Barnet, which is not based on need, is fair. It's not fair to Wales, it's not fair to the northeast of England, and the one thing that we have to learn from all of this is that we need a stable and long-term arrangement.
Okay. We'll pause for a second. We're going to go to the Better Together campaign headquarters because Dr. John Reid is there, Labour's John Reid, former Home Secretary. John, thanks for joining us. What is your sense of how things are going?
Well, it's obviously gratifying, Hugh, to get the first 2 results under our belt, and by fairly significant margins. But, you know, that's 2 out of 32. It does wonders for the morale of the troops here. But in the very nature of these things, there will be ups and downs, and I'm sure there will be 1 or 2 that, rather than creating euphoria here, create a bit of despair. It's going to be a few hours before we know the pattern. But having said that, it's good to see that the first 2 which have come out are under our belt.
What was your sense of the momentum of the campaign in the last, let's say, 4 or 5 days?
Well, I think in the last few days there has been a sort of pushback on the advance that Yes made. I mean, what happened here was that as long as we were talking about the arguments of a separate state, the Yes campaign was losing. So they then diverted a couple of months back onto all sorts of odds and fragmented policy issues, and marshalled the support on top of the nationalist vote of everyone who was against anything, against the Tories, against the English, against the bedroom tax and so on. And I think that worked for a while, but I think the last week or so we've pushed back on it. Now, I'm sure that there will be ups and downs throughout the country. There will be close votes, some we will lose, some we will win. And I'm not making any predictions, but I've thought from the beginning of this that the best thing is to rely on the good common sense of the Scottish people. There's been a huge registration, a very high turnout, and I look forward to seeing that decision in a few hours' time.
How do you think Ed Miliband has performed in the campaign, John? Do you think he's done well?
I think all of the party leaders have done well. They've been at a disadvantage, of course, because the Yes campaign is plainly had an element of it that was anti-Westminster, anti-English, and they all come from that background. But they all have a responsibility because they're all committed to the United Kingdom, and I think the significant thing is that they, in a very nice and courteous fashion, indicated how much the rest of the UK wanted Scotland to continue its partnership. But the basic fight for votes here was among Scots men and women, and that's the way it should be. We have to make our decision about whether we wish to remain to be a member of the club. After that, if we decide, as I hope the Scottish people will this morning, that we want to be a member of the club, we can then talk about the rules of the club.
You know that there's been quite a lot of criticism, even from within Labour, about the quality of Labour's campaign as part of Better Together and the role played by Scottish Labour in particular. Do you think any of that criticism is valid?
I think people fail to underestimate the difficulties of putting together what is the largest and widest peacetime coalition in the history of this country. There has never in peacetime been a campaign that has attempted to bring together the 3 major parties and then all sorts of disparate elements and wheeled it together. And of course there was a separate campaign for all of the three parties as well. Don't underestimate the difficulties doing that. Alex Salmond, on the other hand, controlled the SNP. He controlled the Scottish Government, the Scottish Civil Service, the Scottish Administration, the handout of grants. He okayed the planning permission. It was him who dealt with the universities and the companies who wanted the beneficence of the Scottish administration. So in a sense, his organisation was very easy. It could be a one or two man band, whereas we had to bring together a range of political opinions, some of whom didn't agree on a whole range of issues, but all of whom agreed in one thing, which was the utility and benefits for Scotland of being part of the United Kingdom. And I hope tonight that range will be joined by a majority of the people in Scotland.
Was it a mistake not to have Gordon Brown as a far more prominent campaigner for you earlier on?
No, I don't think so, because you see, there are different stages to this campaign. Given that we had to put together the widest range of unity among various parties, then the man that was chosen to do it was a man known not to be a tribal politician, Alistair Darling. Probably at the time he went into this, the one member of the last 4 years of the Labour government who'd come out with credit. And Alistair Darling was acceptable to every side and could work with every side. Gordon is a formidable force, but I don't think anyone would ever regard him as other than, an exponent of the family of Labour. And therefore it was right that Alistair did that. But of course he was backed up by a lot of people, Jim Murphy, Douglas Alexander, Frank Roy, who was doing the organisation behind the scenes. And all of these Labour stalwarts were prepared to work with the other parties, because this issue is bigger than anything. And we've done it before on the steel industry and other issues in Scotland. And it's right that people expect that you put your petty and your personal differences aside. But at the end of the day, it is a very difficult thing to do, and much more difficult than the task that Alex Salmond had. Towards the end of the campaign, of course, Gordon Brown, Douglas, myself and others came in because it was obvious that there was questions being asked by some of the Labour supporters. Some of them were voting for separatism, the same way that a lot of the SNP supporters were voting for unity. So at that stage, Gordon made a profound contribution.
John Reid, once again, thanks very much for joining us from the Better Together headquarters. I'm just about to make contact, I think, with the Yes campaign headquarters in Glasgow, and our reporter Ken MacDonald is there with a guest. Ken, tell us, what is the atmosphere like, and tell us a little more about what they're saying there.
Well, the joint has been jumping here. We're not as an official Yes party, because there aren't really any official Yes parties. Such is the nature of the campaign, that it's been grassroots, it's been bottom-up now for more than 2 years. And there have been various movements across the country. We've had Asians for Yes, we've had architects for Yes. But what we have here are, if you like, the creative industries for Yes. This is a beautiful old office building in the Merchant City in Glasgow. And we're at the headquarters of Freight Books. The head guy here is Adrian Searle. Adrian, you, when I spoke to you a couple of days ago, were very confident there was going to be a yes vote. Given what you've seen from, well, Clackmannanshire particularly, are you still feeling confident?
Very much so, Ken. This is a numbers game. It's not like a parliamentary election where it's constituency after constituency. It's about every single vote. And that's the really exciting thing about the referendum. Ultimately, it's about the will of the whole people rather than segmenting it up like a Terry's chocolate orange. So from that point of view, I think clearly it's disappointing not to win everything, but we know that it's going to be close anyway. These are both very, very small areas that have declared so far. An area like Glasgow is going to trump all of those and many more. So I think we just have to wait. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
You've been a great host tonight. I'm sorry you didn't join us earlier. We've had stand-up, we've had singer-songwriters, we've had poetry. The Glasgow Poet Laureate, Jim Carruth, was speaking and giving us some of his tremendous verse. Why do you think the creative industries in Scotland have been, by the look of this, about 99% behind the Yes campaign?
I think creative professionals, as part of their raison d'etre, look ahead, they look to the future. There has to be some kind of hope some kind of optimism there for work to really resonate, whether it be art, whether it be sculpture, whether it be prose or poetry. So I think from that point of view, we as an industry and as a profession want to believe that Scotland can be a better place, that we can take it to a place where people's lives are better. It's a more equal society, and we're natural optimists.
I was saying just a moment ago that this is a wonderful office building, not a phrase you hear very often, but it is actually part of the merchant city. The tobacco lords that worked here, this is why this is Virginia Street, and it is a building that was built when the Union was still fairly young. Do you think it's going to see the Union out?
I certainly hope so. Well, I hope that the Union will end tonight. Personally, I think that Scotland is more than capable of looking after itself. An old boss of mine, Vicky Featherstone, who was the Artistic Director and Chief Executive of the National Theatre, a few days ago on Newsnight said that she, if she had still been living here, would be voting yes because she felt that Scotland had become infantilised. And whilst as a Scot through and through that hurt, at the same time I think she's absolutely right. It's incredibly important that Scotland really takes responsibility for itself, stops blaming other people for its woes and ills, and looks forward to the future, takes control. We can do it ourselves, of course we can. We publish a lot of international writers. One Slovenian writer, and Slovenia went through this process 20 years ago. Something that he said was that the biggest benefit that Slovenia had had since becoming independent in 1991 was that they couldn't blame anybody else for their problems anymore. And it's so important that Scotland grows up as a nation and starts to believe that it can control its own affairs.
Do you think possibly this campaign, though, has been, if you like, a bridge too far? That there was very much an idea that perhaps maybe a third of the population were thrilled to the idea of independence, but actually it was a question of trying to pull people up to that 50%, and maybe you haven't just quite made it?
I don't think that's the case at all. I'm still extremely confident that over the course of the night we'll see a yes vote.
This probably will be Scotland's longest night, so as correspondents always say, we'll just have to wait and see.
Ken, thank you very much. Thanks to your guest too. And, well, that's a very useful note for us. A realistic note. Wait for the votes to be counted. Here we are, Better Together. There's Jim Murphy, the Labour MP, who's been a very prominent campaigner for Better Together, arriving at the headquarters just a few minutes ago. This was literally in the past few minutes. And you have to say at this stage, the images we've seen from there look, you know, they seem to be pretty happy with things so far, even though we've only had 2 results in. Can I just stress that? We have 30 to go. But there you are. They've been applauding and celebrating the 2 results in. And Jim Murphy himself has been on social media saying, looks like a very big win, he says, for No in our local authority of East Renfrewshire, and over a 90% turnout. And that's Jim Murphy. Maybe we'll have a word with Jim Murphy in a moment. Let's have a look at some of the key councils to come then. They're not councils, the key local authority areas, the results in the local authority areas in this referendum. Let's join Jeremy again.
Hugh, thank you very much. Now, just looking at these 32 councils, and here we have where the 3 dots are progressing. They're still thinking. We've only got 2 results, as you mentioned. Orkney Islands can't set too much store by that. Only 0.5% of the entire voter population. Clackmannanshire we've discussed. I want to look at 2 others for you, which are Inverclyde and Renfrewshire. Renfrewshire, Inverclyde, which we gather are coming in sooner rather than later. If I give you an reordering of these councils according to birthplace, in other words, the number of people in these council areas who were born in Scotland, that is an indicator that tends to correlate with a desire for independence. So you would think in these areas where it's deepest purple, that's where most people are born in Scotland and stayed, they would be most inclined to want independence. And we see here Inverclyde and Renfrewshire are both on the far end here of this box, so you could see the deeper purple, and it fades, and there are much fewer people born in Scotland at the other end. But let's just stay with Inverclyde and Renfrewshire, and I'll show you a map now of Scotland, just so we can absolutely get a fix on where they both are. So come with me if you can, have a look here, and you see Inverclyde there on the western side. I'll make it flash, near to Glasgow, the mouth of the Clyde. Now, if you look at the number of people who were born in Scotland in Inverclyde, it shows that actually, just bring this out for you, take a look at the graph here, you've got a disproportionate number of residents in Inverclyde who were born in Scotland compared to the Scottish average. So Inverclyde is 93% on the purple column, and the blue column, which is the Scottish average, 83%. And then very, very low down here, people in Inverclyde who are either from other parts of the UK or from elsewhere, other countries altogether. So fairly low immigration in Inverclyde. So again, that tends to correlate with a desire for independence, which is why we will watch it very closely. We'll do the same with Renfrewshire. Renfrewshire is very close to Inverclyde. Have a look at our map here again, and I'll make it flash for you so you can see both in the area of Glasgow, round Glasgow, very similar kinds of places, both with lots of socially deprived areas. Again, that tends to correlate with a desire for independence. So again, you're starting to think maybe Renfrewshire as well is going to vote, would have been expected before the evening began, to vote yes. But let's see, here's Renfrewshire. Again, people born in Scotland in Renfrewshire, very high, above 9 out of 10, 91%, compared to the Scottish average of 83%. So again, we're looking at this because we're looking for indicators, we're looking for clues, trying to get the characteristics of these council areas. And here we have, again, just like Inverclyde, Renfrewshire, a place where not very many people from outside, born outside Scotland or born outside the UK, have come to live. So Renfrewshire and Inverclyde have the characteristics of council areas that would have been expected to go yes. And having seen what's happened in Clackmannanshire and heard about the mood in the Better Together campaign with John Reid talking there about what they feel is coming, you wonder whether we might get results that surprise people tonight from those two council areas. So very interesting indeed, Hugh.
Indeed, Jeremy, thank you very much. Jeremy Vine there with the latest on the seats to come. I say seats, on the areas to come, areas to declare. Let's have a look at the count going on in Stirling, for example. Stirling, in north of the central belt of Scotland, which Michael Forsyth obviously has a big interest in, given his past. Sarah, what do you reckon there?
Stirling is going to be a very, very interesting one because by all the predictions, that's somewhere in the middle of where we would expect the vote to go. So much closer to a kind of bellwether seat than those that we've seen so far. It's a fairly prosperous middle-class area. It used to vote for a Tory MP in Michael Forsyth. So
14 years.
Possibly we would expect it to be tending slightly toward no, but probably pretty much in the middle of the prediction. So it'll be very interesting when it comes in.
OK, so that's the count going on in Stirling. And while Sarah was speaking, John Curtis giving us some guidance on turnout. He says, given the results so far, the overall turnout looks as though it'll be around 84%, says John. Could adjust a little more, but around 84%. If it's correct, he says, it'll be a record high turnout in a nationwide vote in Scotland. Previous record was 81% in 1951. Leslie, I know I thought at one stage you were going to run up to the screen when John Reid was speaking and actually start doing something rather vigorous, because what was it that he said which so offended you?
Well, three things, actually. First of all, the suggestion that that Yes campaigners or the Scots or whatever are in some way anti-English. I mean, and this focus on Westminster, I mean, it's obvious we're here with such a razor close result because lots of Scots have got to the stage where they do not want the agenda that they feel is coming from Westminster. They haven't voted for it for decades. So the questions about the food banks, the kind of society we've become, that is a core part of this debate. And it's nothing to do with English people. It's to do with a difficulty about getting a democratic response to how people vote in this country. The second thing was that it's not just ourselves, but the last opinion poll, in fact the 51% opinion poll, suggested that 60% of voters thought the No campaign was unduly negative. 60% thought the Yes campaign was positive. Now Now, that's not just a spin from us. That's actually the voters' own perceptions of those campaigns. And the final thing, really, is this one-man band lark about Alex Salmond. Now, I appreciate he is a one-man band in the sense that he is the First Minister and he's the leader of the SNP. The peculiar aspect of the Yes campaign has been that it has herded a bunch of cats into some sort of shape, in the sense that there is the Radical Independence campaign, there is the National Collective, there is Women for Independence, there is Business for Scotland. There are as many separate movements within now the wider Yes movement, and it just makes me sad that we have to keep this pretence up that the whole of the Yes campaign is simply one SNP-led campaign led by one man, as if Nicola Sturgeon, for example, who polls regularly higher ratings than Alex, who in turn polls higher ratings than Gordon Brown, Ed Miliband put together, it just doesn't reflect the reality of the esteem in which these guys are held and the wide kind of movement that has developed around Yes, which is why we're sitting here today.
Michael?
I really don't think there's any point in refighting the campaign now. I think what we should be doing is looking forward. We'll get the result in a few hours' time, and we should look forward to what we're going to do to address some of the issues that were expressed on both sides, and as I said before, some of the things which are south of the border. I have to say that to criticise the No campaign for being negative, I mean, by definition, if you're wanting people to vote no, that is a negative thing to do. And that arose because Alex Salmond was allowed to choose the question. So instead of us asking, do you wish to remain part of the United Kingdom, we had a question which is, do you want... So, given what David Cameron did, which was to allow Alex Salmond to choose the timing of the campaign, the question and the franchise, every conceivable advantage was given to the nationalists, to the Yes campaign. And if as it looks likely, there is an overwhelming rejection of that on a big turnout in Scotland, then hopefully we can bury forever the idea of independence and breaking up Britain.
It's probably too early to say that yet, Michael, isn't it? But,
well, I'm just saying, if that is the result, then we can bury that forever and concentrate on finding a constitutional solution to the issues.
Bury that forever.
But Michael, you've just said it yourself. You said earlier that actually if there is a no vote, then there will be dynamics within British society which will be hard to meet, certainly within the timescale, and probably at all. Now, that in turn sets up more dynamics in Scotland of dissatisfaction. And here's the thing. There is a Westminster election coming up quite shortly. We're in it too, if we're still part of the Union. And it's very probable that that dissatisfaction with a non-appearing set of Devo something or other powers will result in a very strong slate of SNP MPs being sent to Westminster.
Well,
and so it goes on. I don't know that this genie goes back in the box very easily.
Oh dear. Well, I mean, I'm taking my lead from Alex Salmond, who said that if the no won, that would be it for a generation.
Well, here's...
I take him at his word.
OK, but here's the other tremendous thing about this campaign. It's actually people who are deciding what they want in this country now. It's suggestions being put forward by politicians, but actually this has all been about people power. So it may well be that if the people are dissatisfied with not seeing proper devolution and an increase in powers, by the timetable as it was outlined, the people may decide they want some way of demonstrating that. That's all I'm saying.
Are there a series of knock-ons that happen? In a sense, you may feel, Michael Forsyth and other people who campaign for a no, this is the definitive rejection, if that's what it turns out to be, of independence. But if the English now demand more powers, that in turn may provoke Scots to think, well, hold on, we want a response to that, and so on and so forth. It does seem to me as if a process has begun rather than ended today, regardless of the result. And that wasn't the point. The very point of this referendum from unionist parties, who, remember, used to taunt Alex Salmond that he was too frightened to hold it. He didn't dare name the date, they used to say. The whole idea of it was to bury constitutional change once and for all, not just in Scotland, but throughout the UK. Well, the reverse, it seems, will be the case.
I don't think that's true. This is a process that began in 1997, arguably in 1979, but actually started happening in 97. All three Westminster parties went into this with some plans for further devolution. Nobody ever thought that this was going to kill stone dead, in the famous phrase, any desire for constitutional change. This is an evolving process. What's being decided tonight is how quickly it moves. OK, let's pause. Michael and Leslie, thank you very much for joining us. I think we're going to give you a rest. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us. I think it's time for us to catch up with a news summary.
Hello, I'm Carol Walker with a summary of the main news. The first results in Scotland's independence referendum have been declared. Both Orkney and Clackmannanshire have voted no. The no vote in Clackmannanshire was 54%, with 46% voting yes. Figures suggest that turnout has been exceptionally high. 32 local authorities will declare results overnight, with a final result expected between 6 and 7 o'clock this morning. Our political correspondent Chris Mason reports.
Ladies and gentlemen, could I have your attention, please? We're now ready to declare...
At just after 1:30 in the morning, the first result.
Yes, 16,350. No, 19,000.
Half an hour later, and 300 miles north, it was Orkney's turn.
Yes, 4,883. No, 10,004. Reject.
So 2 results, 2 victories for the No campaign, and cheers at their headquarters.
It does wonders for the morale of the troops here, but in the very nature of these things, there will be ups and downs, and I'm sure there will be one or two that, rather than creating euphoria here, create a bit of despair.
This is what Scottish democracy looks like tonight. Ballot boxes arriving by air from the Isle of Mull, heading for the Argyll and Bute Count Centre. The turnout has been huge. Those arguing for independence say that's because people are angry.
I think people in Scotland have been channeling that legitimate anger about a broken political and economic system into something positive during this campaign. If it's a yes vote, then we clearly have a path forward for that, defining a written constitution, managing the transition to an independent country. If it's a no vote, it becomes much more challenging, but still vital to capture that energy and to make sure that we can build alliances with people, elsewhere in these islands who share the anger.
You need a head for numbers and strong fingers for a night in one of the 32 count centres across Scotland. The nocturnal arithmetic continues and will do for several hours yet. Chris Mason, BBC News.
A new video has been released which appears to show a British journalist being held captive by Islamic State extremists. John Cantley, seen here in Syria, was captured while working as a newspaper journalist. In the latest footage, Mr. Cantley is seen sitting behind a desk, dressed in orange clothes, delivering a scripted speech into the camera. The United States Senate has approved President Obama's plan to arm and train moderate Syrian rebels to fight Islamic State militants. It's part of Washington's campaign against the group, which has taken control of a swathe of territory across Syria and Iraq. President Obama also welcomed the Senate's vote and praised France for its decision to join airstrikes against Islamic State in Iraq. Detectives in London investigating the disappearance of Alice Gross have named a Latvian builder as the prime suspect. Police say Arne Salkans had served a prison sentence in Latvia for murdering his wife. He went missing a week after 14-year-old Alice disappeared late August. The schoolgirl was last seen on the towpath that Arne Salkans used to get to work. The High Court will decide today whether to allow a challenge to rules introduced by the government last year, which determine whether victims of domestic abuse receive legal aid in divorce and child contact cases. And that's it for now. Now back to Scotland Decides.
Welcome back to the referendum results studio. In the next half hour, we hope to be hearing from Michael Gove and from Samin Campbell too, and Labour's Jim Murphy will be joining us, and Ricky Ross for Yes Scotland. In the meantime, let's join Andrew Neil at Westminster.
Thanks, Hugh. Well, you might think Westminster would be happy with the results so far, but we've just had thunder and lightning over the Houses of Parliament. You can make of that what you wish. I'm joined by Simon Jenkins and Owen Jones. Simon, if it is a no vote, Scotland will expect the Westminster parties to deliver on Home Rule, whatever that means, to deliver on that. If it does, what are the consequences for the rest of the UK?
I mean, everyone's saying the consequences are changes life as it's never been before. I honestly think if it's a no vote, Westminster will declare victory and shut up. They'll give the Scots the minimum of what they want. There'll be howls about the Barnett formula. There'll be complaints from Wales about that. So that's got to be sorted out. But I think England honestly would be ignored. The kick in the teeth for the establishment was supposed to be, and I believe is a kick in the teeth for the establishment. I just don't think it's going to make a lot of difference. In 6 months' time, we'll have forgotten it.
I think that's completely, frankly, I think fantastical, because I think actually there'll be lots of downhearted pro-independence supporters if it is indeed a no tomorrow. But they have the potential not just actually to unleash the constitutional revolution in Scotland, but right across the entire country, because what we've effectively seen is a Scottish insurgency against Westminster rule, an attempt to dampen that insurgency with a whole load of promises.
Made on the hoof.
Made on the hoof, but that has the potential to not just rewrite the relationship with Scotland, but also in England and Wales. And I actually think that will be welcome for many people, because the disillusionment with Westminster you see in Scotland expressed with pro-independence sentiment, it's not just confined to Scotland, it's in England and Wales as well. I think this is the end of the status quo. It has to be the end. We need a constitutional convention and build a new...
That's what I want too.
Well, let's be a bit more optimistic about it next time.
I'm right with you on that. I'm actually being a realist.
Right, well, let me suggest to you where you may be wrong. There's a head of steam building up on the Labour and Conservative backbenches that if it is home rule for Scotland, there has to be something in it for England. The Tory backbenches will certainly not let Mr Cameron give Scotland home rule without something for England.
Well, we don't know what home rule means.
No, but what about the point about England?
The point about England is what you do with England. I mean, this whole business about there being a parliament for England, if there's a parliament for Scotland. Well, we've been there now for quite some time. There is no parliament for England. There's English local government. Localism is, as always, a dead letter. I passionately believe in it. In a sense, it's a tragedy for England that the union's still in place.
Let me ask you this. If this issue of the West Lothian question is answered with English votes only for English laws, where does that leave Labour? Should Labour support that?
Well, I think that would provoke a constitutional crisis, because if Labour win a majority, they put a prospectus towards the British people and they win on that basis, and then they're unable to implement the legislation.
But what happens if they don't win in England?
Well, the way around that is to have a constitutional convention which devolves power and responsibility to regions, because at the moment the danger...
Well, they tried that and they didn't win in the regions last time. They had a referendum.
Things have changed. This is the key point. This is why this is such a game changer.
Well, there's no evidence of huge regional demand.
What they first suggested... incidentally, what was rejected in the northeast of England was basically a glorified quango with limited powers, which people swept away as an extra layer of bureaucracy. This is different. I think the need to rebalance the British constitution will fuel a sense of devolution. Right. And Scotland's on course...
Final minute, Simon. Is it conceivable that Westminster can give Scotland major tax-raising powers and the Barnett formula, because that's what they've promised them?
I think the Barnett formula is dead. I really do. I mean, that's the one thing where the Tory MPs will fight. But that's a very limited point. I mean, the essential point is Westminster never changes unless it has to. It doesn't have to change now. And I wish it would. I'm right with it. I mean, as revolutionary as he is, it just ain't going to happen now.
Scotland's on course for independence in the next generation anyway, because if the status quo remains, because the only demographic who decisively oppose independence are the over 65s. So if this setup is to maintain itself, there will have to be radical change. And in order to assuage potential English grievances and Welsh grievances, there will have to be a new constitutional setup. I think this has unleashed a constitutional revolution.
I hope you're right. But
all right. Well, you're both singing from the same song sheet, but maybe just a little disconsonance there. Let's go back to Scotland Decides.
Now, I think we have a result in. Let's go straight to the result in Shetland.
Answer to the referendum question in this area is as follows. For yes, 5,669. For no, 9,951. There were 15 rejected ballot papers. That concludes the counting of votes for Shetland Islands Council area. Thank you very much.
So we have the result in from Shetland, and the There you can see the vote, 5,669 for the yes campaign, a no win in Shetland, as we'd expected, 9,951, a turnout of 84%. Let's have a look at the percentages. 64% to the no campaign and 36% to the yes campaign. So that's a pretty hefty margin. And Sarah, you were saying earlier that in terms of Orkney and Shetland, we were looking at results in this kind of area.
Not a surprise. Very, very solid Liberal Democrat territory, where the Secretary of State for Scotland, the Lib Dem Alistair Carmichael, has his Westminster seat. Tavish Scott is the MSP for the Shetland Islands, was the leader of the Liberal Democrats in the Scottish Parliament until he resigned after their disastrous result in 2011 there. Shetland, along with Orkney, one of the few places that has kept the faith with the Liberal Democrats, and it's voted along with them, voting a hefty no vote there.
OK, Nick, your thoughts on that?
Well, just no surprise. It's a reminder, isn't it, that when we talk about a debate, a referendum on whether Scotland should separate from the United Kingdom, there are parts of the Highlands and Islands who feel that Edinburgh is terribly remote and that the rule from Holyrood feels like an awfully long way away and not very satisfied with it, but no surprise.
Okay. Well, when it comes to that with Shetland, interestingly, there has been some talk recently coming from Alistair Carmichael himself, among others, that if the rest of Scotland were to vote yes to break away from the United Kingdom, that the Shetland Isles might want to say on whether or not they stayed with the UK.
Interesting. Labour's Jim Murphy is with us, Shadow International Development Secretary, and the musician and broadcaster Ricky Ross from Yes Scotland. Good to have you both with us.
Great to be here.
Well, Jim, this was you a short while ago. Can I just see what we saw at the No campaign headquarters?
What was I doing?
There you go.
Oh.
Not much doubt about that body language.
And I don't even drink. I'm not sure the lady in question.
Anyway, it's good of you to pop over here very quickly. What's your sense of it now, then?
Well, like everyone, delighted by the turnout. Really, in my own constituency, it's over 90% turnout. I think it's great that the 16 and 17-year-olds have voted in such numbers in such a mature way. Whichever way they vote doesn't really matter. I mean, in terms of the participating, I think there's a lesson there for the rest of the UK. And the fact is that perhaps time still allows for it to change the rules for the next House of Commons election next year. Because people used to say, 16 and 17-year-olds, what do they know? They're too young, inexperienced, no life experience, not enough judgment. This blows that out of the water. They have been so engaged, so switched on. You'll have seen it yourself as you're going around the country. And I think if there's still time for the next UK election, let's give 16 and 17-year-olds the vote for the general election. Otherwise, you're going to have 16-year-old Scots who have voted today on the biggest decision that's ever been taken, who have to sit out and watch the next year's UK election and watch it on telly. No, that doesn't seem sensible.
It was raised earlier, and it's certainly a powerful point. Are you on course for victory tonight now, Jim?
I think so. It's too early to say. But I think we've got a decent degree of optimism. I was joking with Ricky, that's 3 results in and we're 3-0 up. But we could blow the full-time whistle now. But I think there's a degree of confidence. But until we get some of the big results out of the bigger 32 places, then it's too early to say for any certainty.
What's your sense of what's going on in Glasgow?
Glasgow's very close. It's my home city. I'd love us to win it. The SNP have put a huge effort into it. I'm not going to try and read on all the arguments of the referendum. That's pointless this evening. But we haven't given up on winning Glasgow this evening. But at the moment, it's too close to call.
Okay. Ricky, your thoughts? What are your sense of it at the moment?
Well, obviously, Jim and I are going to have a big agreement there on all that stuff about young people, because that has been an energising part of the campaign. I've been particularly pleased about it. I was asked about it on television last week down in England on a show. I'm delighted about it. I think young people are at the brunt end of an awful lot of bad decisions. My sense as a musician is it's much more difficult to be a young musician now than it was when we started out. I think things are a lot more difficult. And I think that they're at the very sharp end of policies on employment and housing. And I think for them, I think Jim's right. I mean, I think for them to go through the next election would seem absurd. On the other question of how things are, it's very early. It's very early in the night. And listen, this has been a 2-year campaign, and let's not concertina the end. Let's let it take its course.
Okay, indeed. I think that's a good point. 29 results to come in. So let's. I tell you what, we're going to go to Westminster, and I'll get your response to this contributor too. And I'm sure Nick and Sarah will have something to say to Mr. Gove. Michael Gove has joined us. Michael, good morning to you.
Hi, good morning, Hugh.
Your sense of it so far?
Well, I've just been listening to what Ricky Ross and Jim Murphy have been saying, and I agree with Jim. I think that The first indications are positive for those of us who want to keep the United Kingdom together, but it's too early to say anything definitively.
It's too early to say anything definitive, but if it does proceed in a direction that you would find appealing, Michael, what does that mean? What needs to happen in terms of change in the way that the United Kingdom is structured and governed?
Well, I think it's been clear all three party leaders, UK party leaders, have said that after a no vote, things will change in Scotland, that the Scottish Parliament will have enhanced powers, and all three parties have spelled out, even before this intense stage of the campaign started, different but overlapping ideas about how Scotland could have its Parliament enhanced and how Scottish people could feel that their voices were heard more clearly. Of course, there needs to be a balance there as well. If, as we all hope, we can secure enhanced devolution for Scotland in short order, we also need, with a similar sense of urgency, to make sure that other people within the United Kingdom, in Northern Ireland, in Wales, and of course in England, have their voices more clearly heard and respected than ever before. Westminster needs to change. That's been one of the messages of this campaign and of politics over the past couple of years. And I think that there's a willingness on the part of certainly the Prime Minister and the government to ensure that that change can happen as rapidly as possible.
So tell us what you mean by as rapidly as possible, and how will you deal with colleagues of yours in the Conservative Party, given your post as Chief Whip, who frankly don't think it's going in the right direction?
Well, I think that the overwhelming majority of people in England we saw during the course of the campaign wanted Scotland to stay. I certainly know that all of my colleagues in the Parliamentary Conservative Party wanted the United Kingdom to stay. So if, fingers crossed, it is a no vote, then people will be delighted that our country has stayed together. I think in terms of urgency, we know Gordon Brown spelt out a timetable that had been agreed with all three UK party leaders to ensure that by the time of the next general election, people knew what a devolutionary and enhanced devolutionary settlement in Scotland would look like. I think similarly, we need to have a clear view, bringing in people from all parties and those who don't have political allegiances, people from civil society, to inform a conversation about how we can change things in Westminster. The Conservative Party has outlined a position which I think has a lot of support, not just within Conservative circles, which is that if decisions are taken which affect only the people of England or only the people of England, Wales and Northern Ireland, then we need more clearly to respect the wishes of folk in those particular countries.
Just to go, Nick Robinson is here too.
So, in other words, what was called in the slogan English votes for English laws would now be implemented, despite the fact that you've had it in your manifesto for 4 years and it's not been implemented?
Well, I think everyone recognises that during the course of this campaign, the need for Westminster to change has been articulated across the board. If we're going to have the changes to the Scottish Parliament that have been put forward by Conservatives, Labour and Liberal Democrats, then that does mean change at Westminster and in Westminster's relationship with the rest of the country. We've been clear in the past about some of the types of change that we've wanted, but it's been interesting in the last couple of days to hear Nick Clegg very astutely acknowledge that things have to change as well. And of course, we want to have the broadest possible consensus for the nature of that change, but at the heart of any change has to be a recognition that in the same way as Scotland feels quite rightly that there are proper matters that a Scottish Parliament should reserve to itself and which can only be decided with a majority in that Parliament, so there are certain issues which quite rightly the people of England and England, Wales and Northern Ireland will want to see delivered in a way which respects their views too.
But put simply, that would mean that Jim Murphy, who's here in the studio, would not be allowed to vote on schools, would not be allowed to vote on health, would not be allowed to vote, some of your colleagues think, on certain budgetary matters once income tax, for example, or large chunks of it was devolved to the Scottish Parliament.
Well, with your customary brilliance and acuity, Nick, you are already several steps ahead of where we need to be today. The first thing to say is we still don't know what the result is. The second thing to say is that, by definition, if you're going to change the Constitution, you want to do so with the maximum level of support and consensus and thought. A lot of thought's been given to this. There are clear Conservative proposals. The Prime Minister will say much more later today, provided, fingers crossed, there's a no vote, about the direction of this. But I think it's important not to get ahead of ourselves and not to say this is the precise model. I think it's important to have broad principles there, and the broad principle is, and I think this is widely accepted across England, irrespective of party, that there are some issues which for Northern Ireland, Welsh and English voters need to be decided in a way that respects the majority opinion in those parts of the United Kingdom.
And will the Prime Minister's statement later on in the morning, Mr Gove, take us significantly along this path? Do you think it'll add more to the rather sort of vague details that we've had so far?
Yes, I think the Prime Minister will be very clear about the direction of travel that he wants to lead the government in. Again, I have to stress, even though it may seem boring, it is critical that we don't preempt the decision that the Scottish people are going to take, and which is revealed, of course, throughout the rest of this morning. But if, as seems likely, there is a no vote, then of course the Prime Minister will be saying more, not just about the need to make sure that the interests of Scotland are protected, but also how we bring the whole United Kingdom together and what that means for Northern Ireland, Wales and England. And
that initial timetable we spoke about during the campaign of a matter of months can deliver what, if anything?
Well, Gordon Brown outlined a timetable which involves publishing a command paper that sets out some principles and some detail, then having draft clauses early in the new year, and then by the time of the general election, a pretty clear proposal, legislative proposal, that would be implemented after the United Kingdom general election. I think what we need to do is to have a similar sense of urgency in bringing forward proposals to ensure that at the same time as we would choose to legislate after the general election for Scotland, we'd also make sure that legislative change safeguarded the interests of people in England, Wales and Northern Ireland.
Could that go further? Could it be an English Parliament or devolution to the regions, as the Liberal Democrats would want, the regions of England?
I don't think that we want to go down the route of an English Parliament as has commonly been understood. I think it's always the case that you want to look at how you can improve local government in cities and elsewhere, but the critical thing, I think, is that there needs to be change in order to ensure that Westminster works better for the people of England and Wales and Northern Ireland.
Mr Gove, very good of you to join us early in the morning, and thanks very much, and we will look forward to see what Mr Cameron has to say later.
Thank you.
Michael Gove there, the Government Chief Whip, joining us from Westminster. Let me just show you what's going on in the Western Isles, in Stornoway, Ilan Shir. We are expecting a declaration there pretty soon. Now, again, this is an area where, given the SNP's long tradition, certainly at Westminster and in Holyrood, is there, well established. The Yes campaign should be doing extremely well there. So we'll see. But we're expecting a declaration there, Sarah, quite soon, I think, within the next 10 minutes or so.
And that may be the first area that actually votes yes. That's certainly what we would expect to happen. Listening to Michael Gove, I'd quite like to pick something up with Jim Murphy, if I may. He's talking about the plans for further devolution. The Conservative Party, of course, are offering more powers to the Scottish Parliament than the Labour Party currently have tabled. You're all going to have to get together on this and come up with some agreed plan pretty quickly. Is the Labour Party going to move on that? Will you move towards the Tory position of giving more tax-varying powers to the Scottish Parliament?
Well, let's see if we're still in the United Kingdom by tomorrow morning, of course. But
you were just telling us how confident you were that we would be, so you must be thinking ahead to what the plans are.
Some confidence. I think you give me too much credit, the idea that I think ahead. But if we're still in the UK this time tomorrow, then of course the Labour Party, the Tories and the Lib Dems are going to have to get together and a bit of give and take. As we said we would, each of the three parties is going to have to compromise a bit to put together quite an ambitious package. Now, I can't announce, on the basis that we don't even know the result and we haven't gone into the detail, we are going to get working tomorrow and putting that together.
So the Labour Party are prepared to compromise on this. They're prepared to offer more powers to the Scottish Parliament than have previously been outlined.
Well, as I said, we're going to have to give and take. There's three parties with three different offers. We all three of us can't put together an original offer on the basis that would end up with three different offers. So I think there will be a bit of give and take. The detail of that is for Joanne Lamont and the other colleagues in the Scottish Parliament and myself to work through.
One other thing, Michael Gove made clear that he wants a form of English votes for English laws, which, let's just simplify it. That means Jim Murphy, representative of a Scottish constituency, Douglas Alexander, and lots of other well-known names, would be barred from voting on a whole series of things that came up in the House of Commons. There would be two classes of members of Parliament, something Labour have always resisted in the past.
Well, first of all, I want to be certain that we're going to the House of Commons at all. Let's see if that happens. But I'm not a fan of this idea of kind of two classes of members of Parliament. And Michael spoke about it in rather vague terms. We'll see what the Prime Minister says. But on that basis, you would get to a point where London MPs can't vote on certain things because of all of the issues that are devolved to the Mayor of London and the London Assembly, so which Michael was silent on. So I'm not sure the London MPs have been consulted and discussed that yet either. So we've got a kind of patchwork unwritten kind of stramash of a constitution that's evolved over time. It will continue to evolve, and I don't think the decision in Scotland can go without a response in the rest of the United Kingdom. That much is clear. Personally, my own preference, but look, this is for the people of England, Wales and Northern Ireland to decide. Personally, my preference would be a kind of form of devolved power in the regions, a kind of federal system across England. But again, it's not for me to tell the people of England. The people of Scotland didn't want the folk of England telling them what to do, and I'm not going to fall into that either.
Ricky?
Jim used a lovely Scottish word, stramash, which are maybe our people's... No, it's a great word. And you